Hey everyone, John here. Welcome back to part 2 of this 2-part tutorial series. In part 1, Christoph showed you how to replace a tattoo on Talent's face using the Silhouette plugin inside of After Effects. And in this tutorial, I'm going to walk you through how I took that file and created this final look with a lot of Sapphire and a little touch of Continuum as well. So strap on your seatbelts. We're going to break this down. Okay, so I'm here in After Effects, and obviously this does look a little bit different. What I've done is included the project file for you if you want to download and follow along with me, but of course I can't include the footage. So I've included a beautiful image of my little pug Cookie, and you can switch that out for your own footage. But definitely go ahead and download the project file and follow along. You also might find it useful, even if you don't want to follow along, to be able to strip out some of the Sapphire builder things that I've created and use them in your own work. So what we're going to do is going to dig down into this. I'm going to double click on Talent Matte, double click on Talent, and I'm going to just delete Cookie for now. Sorry, Cookie. And let's walk through this. Now, in Christoph's tutorial, he showed how to replace the mark on the Talent's face with a specific kanji. And I've got the original shot here. Let me just solo that. So I downloaded this stock footage and I thought it was suitably creepy. And at first I thought, it's an interesting mark. I didn't really think too much about it. But as I started to develop this look into more of a sort of Japanese horror, to have something that was more suitable to a Japanese audience. And we'll take a look at the shot that Christoph created. So this is the initial render that Christoph gave me. So there's the character there. This is on, which actually means resentment. And did a great job. But what I noticed when I viewed this underneath the matte that I created was that it was sliding around. When I was looking at it full frame like this, the camera movement, the handheld camera movement didn't really bother me. But if we take a look in this comp here, here's the matte. I've just done a quick render of it unstabilized. And just take a look at this. Watch how it slides under the matte. See how it slides across? I'm trying to sort of feature this tattoo. And I can't do that if the shot is, as the camera pans around, if the shot, the talent is moving in the frame. So I realized after Christoph had done that work for me that I needed to ask for further adjustments. So let me just turn that one off again, come back to Talent. And there was a couple of things I needed him to do. One was to stabilize the shot, and the other was just to make it a little darker and also just to scale it on the y-axis a little bit because I felt it was a little bit stretched. So Christoph kindly obliged me with that, and he did this version. So you can see it's a little darker. It's not so stretched on the Y. And let me just show the render. I'm going to just turn off color correction. But watch what happens to the tattoo. It actually stays pretty stationary. And that's because Christoph used the tattoo. He created a spline around the tattoo and used that for the stabilization with Mocha Pro inside of Silhouette. So now what we've got is we've still got that really nice pan around the talent, but the tattoo is staying in place, which is really good. And I did ask Christoph to do this for me because obviously stabilizing the shot afterwards, after the fact, after doing all the work that he did inside of Silhouette, was a little more complex than I wanted to do myself. So he did this for me, but he did supply me with the file. So I've still got the Silhouette project. It's live here in After Effects. And if I wanted to go in and just make this a little darker or just shift it slightly, I can do that all myself inside of After Effects. All right, with that said, let's just take a look at the rest of the things that I've done in this composition. And the first is to reposition the talent and also to do a mask. So I've feathered it at the top and the bottom like that. And I just wanted to get the right size to fit inside of the matte. I'm just going to go into the matte comp. And so I've repositioned it inside the pre-comp, but notice how it's kind of cut off at the top and the bottom. Let me just show the checkerboard. It's kind of cut off at the top and the bottom. This shot scaled to this size wasn't, big enough. So I had to just do some minor adjustments inside of this composition, and obviously feathering, and also adding a color in the background. First of all, I just duplicated the footage and scaled it up, but I thought just a solid would do for that. And come back to the matte, you can see now we've got the rest of that matte showing top and the bottom. We've also got, if I just turn that off again, we've also got this, the orange hair showing through here. And in the main comp, there's a fair bit of red that happens behind, courtesy of the texture ridges that I have in the background. And I wanted that to be black. So I just put another solid on top of that with a soft feathered mask just to darken that down. So inside the matte here, we now have it black. And that's all that I've done for that shot. And just coming back to the talent comp, the last thing I've done in here is to color grade the shot, because this is kind of like an orange-red sort of feel, and Asian horror often has that red vibe to it. So for that, I've used Sapphire Gamma, and you'll see it goes a little dark. If I just press the U key, you can see there's 2 keyframes there. So we start quite dark, and over about 2 seconds, we actually go quite bright. And this would seem a little too bright. The main reason was so that we could see the tattoo clearly, because once quad tone is applied, Sapphire quad tone, we get that. If I turn gamma off, it's a little dark, right? So I just wanted to be a little bit brighter. So Sapphire quad tone and S gamma for the win on giving it that great color grade. I like quad tone because it gives me the option to have 4 different colors, including black and white. So let me just turn off all of these ones, unsolo these, and come back to Talent Matte, and there we go. You can see as the matte reveals the shot's nice and stable, and it reveals the tattoo. And we'll talk about the tattoos reveal in a moment, but what I want to talk about first is the actual matte itself, because this is actually the reason I created this tutorial. Sapphire 2026.5 introduced Sapphire TextureRidges, and Sapphire TextureRidges has a really beautiful organic look, and in some cases is almost a kind of creepy look. And this was the basis for this whole tutorial. It just ended up being developed into this creepy, Japanese horror vibe. So let's select the TextureRidges Matte Circle Seam Hide. It's a long name. Comp. Double click. And just going to turn off transparency there. There's my matte. Now, I've got 2 here. The top one is actually hiding a seam. We'll talk about that in a moment. I'm just going to double click and go into here. And this is the comp where I have Sapphire Effect. And I'm using Sapphire Effect Builder to build this up. So let's go into the builder by clicking on Edit Effect. And I'm just going to quickly walk you through this setup. Okay, I'm just going to turn off my checkerboard, show checkerboard, and just roll in my mouse there a little bit. And it looks complicated, but it really isn't. What I've got here, if we just start from, let's see, S TextureRidges, I've got preview selected nodes selected. So there's that beautiful organic Sapphire TextureRidges. Okay, really, really nice look. And I wanted to see if I could create a matte for that. And I was really just experimenting and working out whether I could actually do it. And this is what I came up with. So what we've got here is we've got Sapphire Shape, and that's being used as a mask for Sapphire TextureRidges. So here's Sapphire Shape. It's fairly soft at the top and the bottom. We've got some transparency there. I'll show the checkerboard. And that's matting out TextureRidges, okay? So it kind of fades out at the top and the bottom. And if I just, for a second, just disable the next Sapphire Shape and just come straight down to, actually I'll just disable Threshold as well, disable, come down to WarpPolar. WarpPolar is great for creating the circular shape, okay? So now we got that look. And there's that seam I was talking about. That's part of the current version of WarpPolar, unavoidable at the moment. And I like that, But obviously to use it as a matte, I have to sort of fill it with white in the center. So I'm going to enable the second shape, Sapphire shape, and that's fading out at the top, so feathered at the top, and that's done using the blur setting, and it's, full, it's solid down the bottom. And if I click on WarpPolar again, we get that look. So there you go. That's the basis of that matte. Pretty creepy, right? Beautiful organic edges. Now there is Sapphire Threshold sandwiched in between that. I'll just enable that again. And you can see how that sort of crushes down the whites. So we go from there to there. So it just sort of like makes our matte a little more solid. Okay, obviously that's fully controllable using the threshold. So I can increase and decrease that. And this is the beauty of Sapphire Builder, right? Being able to combine Sapphire effects to create the effect that you really have in mind. Okay, so now we have that. So that is actually piped into the foreground of Sapphire layer. And as you can see, there's another one on the other side. I wanted to make this a little more complex. So here I've used a second Sapphire TextureRidges with some slightly adjusted settings. Here I've leaned into the inversion threshold that to sort of give us that sort of really creepy looking result, fractal result there. It's almost cellular. And once again, we've got the shape, Sapphire shape, masking that out like that. And we've got WarpPolar. And then that's actually connected to the background of Sapphire layer. So if I click on Sapphire layer, now we have this result. So we get this different kind of, or slightly adjusted Sapphire TextureRidges combined with the original one. And it gives us a really nice, detailed, organic look. If we take that off, and we've only got that, right? And if we connect it again, now we have that. Very nice. And beneath that, we have Sapphire Sharpen, just to give us a little more detail in that matte. And right down the bottom here, we have our source. Now, I've used a white solid because I wanted to have a separate matte, and you create my track matte inside of After Effects. But of course, you could apply this particular look to your footage and matte the footage out directly, which is great if you're using a nonlinear editor version of Sapphire. And beneath that, we have Set Alpha, and we're piping all of that into the matte port of Set Alpha. So that's creating the matte for the source. All right, and the only other thing to mention is that, if I click on any of these, you can see I've deselected a whole bunch of parameters just by clicking on this button up here and only selecting the parameters that I want to see in the host. And sorry, there is one more thing. I have actually used parameter linking to link, you can see it's green here, link the center for WarpPolar. If I click on the stopwatch here, you can see I've checked Make Driver. So this is the driver, and the one with the red side is the one that's being driven. You see the little link here. And from the list, I've chosen WarpPolar Center. So all that means is if I change the center of the matte, that this one will update and maintain the same position. So I'm just going to cancel that. And back here in After Effects, here's all my effects and the parameters that I've made visible. I've made a few of the TextureRidges parameters visible because it gives me a little more flexibility to work directly here in After Effects rather than having to go back to the builder. But you can see if I just change these settings, I can change this lookup quite dramatically. Same for the TextureRidges number 2. I can make this quite flexible and really customize it. And this isn't included with the presets that ship with Sapphire because I'm still developing this look. But if you wanted to go ahead and, tweak it inside of the builder and save it as your own preset, by all means do that. I may keep working on this and include it with the presets that I create for the next version of Sapphire, version 2027. And a couple of other small things to mention. The first is some keyframes. You may have noticed that it actually changes shape. I've set a couple of keyframes to this. I wanted it to have some kind of, organic movement or a sort of creepy organic reveal. And to do that, I've used mainly WarpPolar. So you can see I've animated the inner radius of WarpPolar 1. That's the inner texture ridges layer, that one there. Just going to undo that so I don't add another keyframe. And I've also done it for the outer one as well. So a couple of keyframes for that. And also in TextureRidges 1, I've just animated the scale lights just to fine tune that a little bit. And if I just hit Tab and come back to the seam hide, just quickly talking about this seam, I didn't like that I had this seam. It's really quite obvious in the main comp. So what I did was I basically masked out the seam on one layer, or most of the seam, and then I duplicated it and I inverted that mask and just feathered it a little bit and just placed that on top just to hide that seam. Just like that. It's still slightly visible, but in After Effects, it's very easy to do that kind of thing. So once again, I'll hit Tab and come back to Talent Matte. And let's see here, Distort Blur. Remember I talked about this tattoo? You can see there's a mask on the Sapphire Distort Blur effect. And there's also this variation for the matte. So I've got this variation. It's just a slightly adjusted one. You can see I've turned off the outer texture ridges because I wanted to use this just as a map for Sapphire Distort to make it look as if the tattoo was kind of being painted on. And let's just turn that off. Select the talent. I'm going to roll right in here. You can see how that's being distorted there. I'm going to turn Distort Blur on and off. See that? So it's using that matte. If I use the existing seam hide, let me just choose that. So for lens, I've chosen the variation. If I choose the existing one, we still get some of that distortion, but it's kind of hidden by the matte itself. So by using a variation and just changing the animation just slightly, come back to the variation, just offsetting it slightly, we get the reveal, but we get this kind of like offset smearing. So it feels as if the tattoo is kind of smearing onto the skin, which I thought was just a little more effective. And you can see for Distort Blur, I've chosen Matte from Path Mask 1. If I choose None, then we're distorting everything. But I just wanted to distort the tattoo itself. And because the shot has been stabilized, the tattoo stays in basically the same position. I didn't even have to keyframe that mask. So let's come back to the main comp, Ghost Story. And that's our talent matte. So next, let's take a look at how I've used Sapphire TextureRidges again with Sapphire Effect Builder to create the background. And I've split the background into two separate layers. It's going to solo background A first. For this one, I didn't actually use Sapphire Effect. I've just used a straight Sapphire TextureRidges effect. And we've got this kind of rising sort of fire plasma-like look. And I used a preset for this. I'm just going to click on Load Preset. There's some great presets here. I'm pretty sure I use this one here, Wisps. You can see it's pretty close. Just applying that and just changing the color and making a few minor adjustments to that. And that sits nicely in the background. And to add a little bit of interest and detail, I've used TextureRidges again, but this time I have used Sapphire Effect Builder. So I'm just going to click on Edit Effect. And this is a variation of the circular matte that I've just shown you. So let me just quickly walk through this. So there's my TextureRidges, and you can see I've actually got frequency set to 0, which is giving me these nice lines. And because there's a boil in there as well, the lines are moving, which makes that quite interesting. There's the matte shape that's piped into the mask port. And I've used the second matte shape to fill that. And I've used Sharpen to sharpen it up, so very similar to the other one I just showed you. But I haven't used WarpPolar for this. What I have done is I've got my source, which is a black solid. I've used Set Alpha, and I've used that as a matte to mask out the black solid. Once again, that could be footage if you wanted it to be footage. beneath that, I've applied Warp Transform. And Warp Transform has been used to move this into position. And you can see that wrap X and Y are set to reflect. And if I just make that no, then we only see one. But by having it on reflect, we get it coming up from the bottom as well. So it makes it quite an interesting background there. I'm going to click OK. And that just sits over the top. And because it's black, it only really gets revealed in the brightest areas. If I just open TextureRidges here, remember I said we set Rel Freak Y to 0. If I just increase that slightly, then we can reintroduce some of that more organic, sort of tendril-like look to it. I do like it straight, and that's how I actually rendered it, but that's actually pretty nice as well. And you can adjust the boil speed and have that sort of moving around more. So another way to use Sapphire TextureRidges inside of Sapphire Effect with Sapphire Effect Builder and really take it to the next level. So I like both of those looks, but together they look really interesting. Right, so that's the background. And if we just turn on the matte, now we've got that. Remember I said I made the hair a bit darker? That's why, because we've got this bright orange sitting behind it. And it didn't look quite as good with this sort of like the muddy brown over the orange. I just thought that having that black looked much better. Okay, so next we'll take a look at how I did the text look. And for this, I've used Sapphire and Continuum. So I'll just double click text treatment and double click text base. So here's the base. So we've got Ghost Story, and the font I've used for that is Babas Neue. And for the Japanese text, or Chinese characters, I've got Kai in Japanese and Dan. So Kai Dan, which means Ghost Story. So quite simple, just a couple of keyframes for the kanji, position keyframes just to slide them up. And as they slide up, some opacity keyframes for Ghost Story. Okay. So that's inside text treatment, and this is where all the magic happens. So I've got a couple of effects applied. The first is Sapphire Effect. So let's just click on Edit Effect, take a look at that inside of Sapphire Builder. All right, so quickly walk through this. It's pretty simple setup. I've got previous selected node turned on. It's going to roll in here a little bit. And under the source, which is obviously the text, I've got noise. And noise is new in Sapphire 2026.5. Under the modes, you have different kinds of noise that you can choose. And one of those is Simple Ridge Fractal. And this is the same noise that's used in Sapphire TextureRidges. So you can apply noise here inside the builder because it's a builder-only tool. And you can set all your settings up. And if you decide you didn't want to use a more simple noise, you could switch to Simple Ridge Fractal. And that's what's very subtly just animating upwards behind the text. Let me just see if we can see that a little more clearly. If I just adjust the offset dark, there we go. So you can see that's actually animating upwards. The reason it's animating upwards is because shift speed Y has a value in there. And it's kind of matching the movement of the background TextureRidges. Okay, so next is Sapphire Channel Switcher. And if I click that, you won't see any difference. Let's just take a look at the checkerboard. All right, so we'll come back to noise. So there's noise, so fully opaque. But with Channel Switcher and all the channels set to Luma, we actually get transparency. But we're still keeping that noise visible in there. Okay, so we're basically taking the result of this and making it a Luma matte. To that, I've applied tint, Sapphire Tint, made that red. And if we just turn off the checkerboard now. Lastly, Sapphire Ultra Glow. And as I so often do, I've used Atmosphere just to give it more of a smoky look. And I was actually pretty happy with that look. You can see here in the main comp that actually looks quite good, but it's a little too clean. does have the sort of smokiness there, but it's just a little sharp and too clean. So I was trying different things to see if I could break this up, and I ended up relying on Continuum for this. It really was almost like a one-click solution. You can see if I turn on BCC Edge Grunge, now we get that look. And the only thing I've adjusted for this is the texture grain size. If I just reset that, so this is the default settings. All I did was bring texture grain size down to 0, and that reintroduced some of the original red and gave me the result I was looking for. So it was as simple as applying the effect and just adjusting that one setting. So happy with that look. I love how when we get that noise moving through and the smokiness from the ultra glow moving around the text, that we get these bright areas, these hot areas from the BCC Edge Grunge. Such a cool look. And back in the main comp, I think that makes a big difference. The last thing I've done in here is just, again, use Sapphire Distort Blur, just to give it more of a ghostly movement. You can see as I just drag through here, I haven't rendered this, but we're just getting some ghostly smearing with the text. And that's because for the lens, I've chosen background A. So remember, that's our background A. So that's actually used as a lens for Distort Blur. And I didn't have to pre-compose it because I've chosen Effects and Masks. Okay, so here's what we have so far. Looking pretty nice. And while I did experiment with some other Sapphire effects for this, I'm so happy that I also have Continuum, because like you just saw, it was like a single effect I could drop on and get exactly the look I was after. So I'm happy to have both suites. All right, so we're almost there. We've got these last 3 layers. The first is Sapphire Grunge. And you can see we've got these very fine hairline cracks. I've also got tint applied because S-Grunge by itself, it has an emboss feature that gives it kind of a 3D look, but I didn't like the white specular. So I just use Sapphire Tint with an orange tint lights value just to make that orange, just to help that to sit in there a little bit better. And for S-Grunge, for the stamps, I've got hairline cracks, okay? I was actually doing a bit of experimenting with the different stamps in here. There's a few new ones that were added in 2026.5. And I actually did like that one, Decaying Damask. Let's just go to stamp 3 that has none at the moment, and just choose that Decaying Damask. This has got kind of like some sort of creepy wallpaper look. And if we were to take that and just take that down below the matte and maybe change the color of it, stamp 3 details. Yeah, we don't like that color. Let's just sample these colors, make it quite dark, and play around with the size. Maybe increase the density and change the opacity. Look that back. That could be quite interesting as well. That kind of look just adds another detail in there, really simply, just by choosing that stamp. And I can always come up and I could play with, the overall stamp size, density, stamp opacity. Once the stamps are in place, you can use their individual settings or the global settings. I just type in seed. There's also a seed value as well. So once I've got it dialed in, I just play with the seed until I've got exactly the look that I want. Very nice. Okay, above that we have some dust. So this is S dust. I'm just going to solo that. So a little bit of drifting dust. There's just an amber preset inside the Sapphire dust presets. Always very effective for adding a little bit of depth to a shot. Not too much though, just a little bit. You may not have even noticed it when you saw the initial render. Just floating over the top. And last of all, an ultra glow adjustment layer. Now for this ultra glow adjustment layer, what I've done is I have decreased the width X, taken that right down to make these quite sharp, okay? So they're vertical lines, which is quite a nice look. And that's just being picked up in the brightest areas. Without it, it looks okay, but I like how it picks up the highlights in the talent and also in the text. And as usual, I could have played for hours, but of course you have to finish somewhere. But if you do have any questions about anything you've seen here and want to know more, please leave a comment. You can learn more about Sapphire's effects and also Continuum's effects on the Boris Effects website, where you can also download a free trial. Once again, this is John for Boris Effects. See you in the next tutorial.